Older generations of Reddit, who were the I don't use computers people of your time? When remote control TVs came out, I suggested that my father buy one, and he said, "It'll be a cold day in hell when I'm too lazy to tell one of you boys to get up and change the channel." It was such an amazing sentence that I committed it to memory, and I still remember it word for word 50 years later. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural NC in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story how when riding on a bus back from work one day, and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blakeman got one of them fancy TVs. Saying how it was an evil thing and would simply bad of them to buy one, and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough never to get one. Of course, they knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that Grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on these neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which then was an hour drive from anywhere else. Edit 1, wanting to stay semi-anonymous, Western NC, near Boone. Edit 2, my first silver. Thank you, stranger. Touch tone dialing. My mom refused to pay the $1 and change a month to have it. She finally caved in around 2002. Edit, since several have asked, touch tone was a keypad, much like what almost every phone is now. Before that it was a rotary dial phone. I'm not an older generation, but my grandparents are very old-fashioned for their generation, if it counts. My grandfather worked as a grocery manager for years. He finally quit when his small mom and pop store buckled down on bar scans and electronic cash registers. He was convinced that barcodes were going to be the mark of the beast from Revelations, and that if people use computers to access porn, then all computerized items must be banned. So there's that. My grandfather was Mennonite, but had moved to a city and worked in factories as an adult. He even used to watch TV, until John Wayne died, then he got rid of their set. He said it was evil to watch dead people moving around on the screen as if alive, like watching ghosts. He would constantly tell us that TV was the devil's work. As a kid, I started drawing cartoon characters, like animal characters and stuff. One day he asked to see my drawings, and he was outraged, saying I was drawing the product of bestiality. Said it was evil. All that said, I loved him, and as I got older he and I got really close. He was a God-fearing man, but he was also a very humble, peaceful, and funny guy. He taught me woodworking, gardening, and the joy of just sitting quietly in nature. When I was first out of undergrad, 96, I went to work on Wall Street. I was assigned a desk that happened to include the oldest person in the office. His first day on the job was the fucking 1929 crash. He hated the computers, of course, but what really got him was the fact that every damn desk needed a telephone. He'd use them, but he grumbled about it. He would complain pretty frequently and loudly about the fact that he couldn't smoke cigars and drink whiskey at his desk. To be fair, he also grumbled about the fact that women worked right there with the real brokers. He also told dirty jokes. The only one I remember is young Mr. Smoke-a-Lot, do you talk to your wife after sex? Only if you're near a phone. Then he'd ask me if I understood the joke. Every time he told it, R.I.P. Andy. You were one of a kind. Probably still that I don't use computers people. I'm going back to late 80s/90s here, but worse. Computers were still fringe enough that most people could happily live and work without having to interact with one, but for many people it was a weird source of pride to not use, or not even be able to use, one. For example, we had 3 PCs at our school when I was there, 2 in the business studies room and 1 in the library. The business studies teacher more or less refused to touch hers, and the librarian openly admitted to being scared of hers. I ended up being de facto tech support, at age 13/14, for all 3 computers. Fast forward a few years and I ended up working nights in a hotel. With one of the receptionists, my first job of the night was to check in all the guests on the computer, and my last job was to print all the bills out for the next day's checkouts. All because she refused to even learn to use the system. She'd just do everything from printouts or handwritten lists. I think she was only in her 30s, too. I guess many of these people never adapted and simply got older. My mom is the Luddite who refused even to touch a smartphone for fear it would explode or something. When she calls for information, she can't understand why some woman wants her to press buttons when she just needs to speak to someone, so she randomly presses buttons till she gets someone live who she yells at. So, not good at all. The initial solution was for me to email for clarification and docs, CC her ACCT, and then my mom's account receives docs, I print them, she signs it, I scan it and send it from her email account with an email message she has dictated. Eventually my brother and I set her up for electronic payments, billings, etc., and because we manage her account, the whole irritating thing is out of her hands. Now that she has seen what we do with our phones, she wants one. I don't know, I think she's good for now and will probably forget about it. I'm 44. When I was a kid we went to visit a great uncle. The entire visit was memorable. First thing I remember is pulling into a farmyard and this German shepherd comes flying out, barking, and loses his shit sufficiently that he grabbed a passing chicken and killed it. Now here comes great uncle, fuck, I don't even remember his name. Let's call him Otis. Otis grabs the chicken in one hand and the dog in the other and just wails the fuck out of the dog with the dead chicken. He then ties the chicken to the dog's collar by the legs. But wait, Kifferella. Chickens have bones in their legs. How does that work? With a terrific fucking racket, I tell you. I remember when I got the nerve to ask when he would take the chicken off, he said fucking want. Fucking dog will live with it till it fucking rots off. Old school farmers do not fuck around with a dog what kills livestock or dinner. My dad later assured me we were actually super lucky he didn't shoot the dog immediately, on principle. His home had 2 newfangled things: the electricity and the telephone. He allowed that not having to fill oil lamps was nice. But he was not a fan of the quality of the light. We attempted to explain the theory of a dimmer switch to him, but he said it sounded a bit too newfangled, and he was still hand pumping his water every day. We did tell him he could get an electric pump and he basically just narrowed his eyes and said, "Really? Fuck off." He figured the telephone was utterly useless. "If I wanna talk to you, I'll come fucking see you." He was in his 90s. I swear if we had told him he could use an electric heater and not have to chop and stack cords of wood every year. My co-workers are in their mid-40s and still use the "I don't use computers" excuse. Drives me insane. Some people took classes, but for the most part no one taught us how to use computers, we just sort of figured it out. Why can't you do the same? Also, if you are in your 40s, that means the internet started becoming mainstream when you were in your teens or 20s. Smartphones started becoming the norm when I was in my early 20s, so by that logic I should be able to use the excuse that I don't understand smartphones because I didn't grow up with them. There is no magic in millennials' DNA that allows them to magically figure out computers and other technology. We just actually put effort into figuring something out and trying to understand instead of getting frustrated and immediately giving up. It's like when my co-workers will call me over to help them fix the printer. They don't understand how I know what's wrong with it. Well, I fucking read the screen and it said low toner. Jesus Christ, people. Microwaves? Damn. People were so against alternate ways to heat food. It was stove or nothing. Cell phones. Damn. And not for the reason that you would expect, like they don't want to feel that they are tethered to society, but it was straight, well, we didn't have cell phones when I was little and we were fine. In both cases, the people thought that they would never use technology, suddenly found all sorts of uses for them once they had one. This was especially evident with people who got a cell phone for their car just in case of emergencies. Emergency cell phones had some really crazy plans that cost $3 a minute, and people started racking up large bills as they start to find various other reasons to make calls. Gen X weighing in: if you've ever met anyone smugly saying, "I don't use computers," set the Wayback Machine to the 1980s and imagine what it was like for those of us watching people smugly saying, "I don't watch television." In the 1980s and early 1990s, it was nearly impossible to overstate the importance of television as an instrument of mass media. The more limited selection and lack of an aftermarket meant that millions of people were having the same experience at the exact same time. The world came to a halt when MASH aired its 2-hour finale, with 121 million people tuning in to watch. I mean, Game of Thrones is a good series, but do you really think it, or any other TV show, is ever going to pull those numbers again? The TV movie The Day After brought the world to a halt again later the same year, triggering a policy shift on nuclear engagement in the Reagan administration. Breaking Bad was good, but it didn't budge the numbers on drug policy or health care. To those of us raised on television, saying "I don't watch television" was like saying I'm deliberately cutting myself off from a major aspect of the human experience in the Western world. You were choosing to exile yourself from this shared experience, generally out of a sense of moral entitlement that came with a social cost. To be fair, people who went around bragging that they never watched television had other aspects of their personalities that were somewhat unappealing. I haven't watched broadcast television in years, and I don't have cable, but that's just because what we used to call the aftermarket is now, well, the market. If 40-year-old me told that to 20-year-old me, I think 20-year-old me would have been shocked. Everything downloads and DVDs now, and we watch what we want, when we want. We no longer tune in to a time slot, we rent access to a library. Nobody screamed "Act no spoilers" and ran out of the room when it was revealed who shot JR, because we'd all seen the episode already. Then again, hashtag Patrick Duffy and hashtag shower scene were never viral hashtags. From 2001 through 2005, I worked at a prominent law firm in New Haven Court, CT. The top two named partners flat out refused to use computers, even after the CT court system stopped taking hand submissions of cases, and required them to be digitally submitted. My job was originally a courier. I walked everywhere around New Haven, CT, sometimes 20 miles in a day, hand delivering papers, photo development, and memos to other lawyers around the city. All the case files were in these Redwell accordion elastic pockets, in a storeroom using manila folders and an index/decimal system, because they believed that computers would fail and they wouldn't be able to bill the clients correctly. When I left in 2005, they were still on it. I had switched my role from courier to working with their IT department. I had my ANCNA and MCSE, but never bothered to actually look for a job in that field, due to a year of not enough experience, responses to resumes. But, anyway, the woman in charge had no idea how NTSF worked, and so I offered my services at the whopping rate of $20,000 a year, because I didn't know any better. We get everyone off of Windows NT 4 and 95/98 and into XP Pro/Server 2000 environment, and yet still I had the task of hand scanning every letter, scrap of paper and document into digital format, and we had to keep double records of everything because these top two lawyers refused to work with, or let their admins use the computer network. We had someone who kept the card catalog of indexed numbers, which they typed with a typewriter, brother word processor. And these same lawyers were notorious for requesting a client file, pulling everything out of it, then putting the file back to be returned, but keeping all paperwork on their desk. So it all had to be manually looked up for each piece of paper, which client file, which subfolder it went back to. In 2005, I brought them over to a new version of Exchange, upgraded everything in the office, and then finally asked for a raise to be on par with CT. Except I asked for half the difference between my then $20,000 rate and the going rate of $80,000 for the same thing. I asked for $50,000 and was let go the next week, in lieu of not needing my position anymore. They hired a third party to maintain it instead, going with someone's friend who had an IT firm out of Mass who charged $199/HR with a minimum of 3 hours per visit. They figured it would save money. Heard they went down hard about 9 months after I stopped maintaining it, and it cost them a lot to rebuild it from the ground up.